Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Carlin Meyer, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm the board president for Lighthouse Foundation of Chicagoland, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Lighthouse Foundation's Black Queer Equity Index update. So whether you're familiar with the project or came here to get more information, or if you've participated in the BQEI, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat by dropping your name, where you're watching from, and why you decided to join today. And when you do so, we'd love to know if you're here on behalf of an organization. And if you are one of our CARE members, that's the Coalition of Accomplices for Racial Equity, please let us know what CARE organization that you represent, or if you're an individual supporter. And to everyone joining us, regardless of how you got here, thank you so much for being here. So to start off, we just have a couple housekeeping items. Please note that we are recording this event, and we might use screenshots from the presentation in our promotional materials. We have a lot of information that we are excited to share with you tonight, so please keep yourselves on mute, but we will have a Q&A at the end of the presentation. So to submit a question, what you'll be able to do is send a message directly to our executive director, Jamie Frazier, and then we'll address those after everyone's had a chance to speak. Thank you. So let's talk about what brings us here. The BQEI, or the Black Queer Equity Index, is Lighthouse Foundation's signature 2021 Racial Justice Initiative. Thank you. We unveiled it in April of this year. Please mute if you haven't. Thank you. We've unveiled it in April of this year, and I am so excited that we get to update you about it today. But first, we're going to give you a little bit about who we are. So Lighthouse Foundation as an organization is a Black queer-led multiracial social justice organization that advances justice for Black queer people across Chicagoland through empowerment, education, and entertainment. Our core team currently includes 3 full-time and 1 part-time staff. And so that's Jamie Frazier, our executive director, Hannah Peewee, our manager of communications, Spencer Titus, our manager of operations, and Dr. Alan Womble, our manager of strategy. We also have 2 different teams that help us organize and advocate for our community, and those are the Black Queer Caucus and our Coalition of Accomplices for Racial Equity, also known as CARE. These teams are currently led by Carrie Fleming, James Thomas, Candace Hairston, Alan Womble, and myself. Now, the Black Queer Caucus encourages Black queer flourishing by creating programming and hosting events, and by identifying issues affecting Black queer people. Our CARE leaders organize externally by holding LGBTQ+ institutions accountable for serving our community equitably. CARE is currently made up of 16 member organizations, as well as those individual supporters who have pledged to help Black queer liberation across Chicagoland and beyond. We've kept our momentum during the pandemic, I'm happy to say, reaching thousands with our message of Black queer healing, justice, and equity. And what we're going to discuss tonight is one more step into that purpose. So here's our agenda for the evening. First, Executive Director Jamie is going to lay out the vision and process for the project. After that, Center on Halstead Board Chair Angela Barnes will discuss the Advisory Council. And then you'll hear from listening session attendees, Louis Spraggins, and AIDS Foundation of Chicago CEO John Peller. After that will be Dr. Alan Womble, who will share our research findings. And then BQEI Taskforce member Adrian Ermer, who will present our emerging equity indicators. And finally, Northwestern Edit Team member Eric Glenn will discuss next steps along with Jamie. If you have any questions during any of this time, please submit them in the chat to Jamie Frazier, and we'll address them in our Q&A at the end of the presentation. So as our speakers prepare to present, we're now going to close the public chat, but you'll still be able to submit questions to Jamie directly. Thanks in the meantime for introducing yourself to the group. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Jamie Frazier, Lighthouse Foundation's Executive Director, who's going to share the vision and process for the Black Queer Equity Index. Jamie, please go ahead.
Thank you, Carlin, so much for your wonderful introduction. And Hannah, I'm going to ask for another 5 minutes. Let's keep the public comment chat box open, because I know that there's some folks who are joining late, and I want to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to share your name, pronouns, what organization, if any, you are here representing or affiliated with, and finally, why you chose to be here on a Thursday night. I'm Jamie Frazier, and my pronouns are he, him, his. This evening, we gather to share more about the Black Queer Equity Index, a data-driven approach to racial equity that ensures greater employment opportunities, including executive team roles and leadership positions like executive board service for Black queer people, especially those who live on the south and west sides of this city. The Black Queer Equity Index aims The BQEI is in a unique position to add further nuance to existing knowledge on the experiences of Black LGBTQ+ workers. While current literature explores some experiences of queer workers, research has not sufficiently explored the specific experiences of Black queer employees in nonprofit spaces. The BQEI will address this by relaying the experiences of Black queer stakeholders in the Chicago LGBTQ+ nonprofit sector. The primary goals of this project are to identify institutional barriers to Black queer professionals' success and to implement recommendations for achieving racial equity. By centering the experiences of some of the most marginalized, we are helping ensure that these workplace equity recommendations will trickle up from our community to all others. Additionally, we seek to address the barriers that prevent Black LGBTQ+ people who work and serve on executive boards from exercising the community expertise for which they were selected. Our strategy is to attain these two goals through engagement on 3 levels: with CEOs of the institutions, with Black queer employees and board members, and with LGBTQ+ community members at large. One way Black LGBTQ+ people can claim power is by society creating inclusive workspaces in which we can lead and thrive. By providing more opportunities for employment and retention of Black queer leaders in Chicago, we create a system that will ultimately benefit all leaders and that will better position these organizations to more adequately serve their Black queer clients. Let's talk about evaluation and methods. Let's talk about the surveys. Our original intention was to create one demographic survey to be administered to each organization's human resources department, and one open-ended survey for Black queer board members and employees on their experiences in the organization. However, we concluded that to gather the most comprehensive data possible, we needed to create 4 surveys that address the nuance of data collection and board member experience. One demographic survey to be administered to each organization's HR departments. All 5 organizations completed the survey. One employee self-identification survey for organizations that do not keep demographic data. Take us to the next slide, Hannah. 70 employees responded from the 2 organizations that did not previously collect this data. One open-ended survey for Black queer employees that 43 Black queer employees completed from 4 organizations, and one open-ended survey for Black queer board members that 11 Black queer board members completed from 4 organizations. Take us to the next slide. The Black Queer Equity Index occurred in 4 phases. In phase 1, we invited 5 organizations to form the first BQEI cohort: AIDS Foundation Chicago, Center on Halsted, Chicago House, Howard Brown Health, and Equality Illinois. These 5 organizations are the most influential and well-funded LGBTQ+ serving institutions in Chicago. Together, they control a combined $186 million in funding, translating to more than 1,000 jobs and tens of thousands served. Because of their dominance in Chicagoland, they are also charged with serving large swaths of the Black queer community. Additionally, all of these organizations provide care and/or advocacy to those living with HIV. Because HIV disparately impacts Black LGBTQ+ people, Lighthouse Foundation believes it is key to our community's wellness and upward social mobility to engage these 5 nonprofits. We met with CEOs from all 5 surveyed organizations to determine which demographic data each organization collected. CEOs also shared their preferred method for survey administration and their strategies for communicating with employees and board members. Equality Illinois chose not to move forward in the process after supplying demographic information. Let's talk the quantitative stuff. We wanted to discuss the interactions of Black queer employees and board members with the organizations. The demographic survey administered to human resources departments collected data on the age, race, gender identities, and sexual orientations of clients, employees, board members, and senior staff. As we assessed possible project risks and issues, we realized that we needed to gather information from the participating organizations to determine what kinds of demographic data they keep. Take us to the previous slide, Hannah. Rather than ask about an employee's sexual orientation directly, some employers instead provide opportunities for employees to disclose that information willingly. Thus, we created a self-identification survey to gain demographic information for organizations that did not have ways to gather it. Let's talk about the qualitative. For survey design, we kept the surveys short with no more than 15 questions to encourage participation. Additionally, we used a mixture of question types, including multiple choice questions, Likert scale, which are very common in surveys, and ask respondents to rate a statement from strongly agree to strongly disagree. Gutman scale questions, which allow for multiple selections to measure the severity of an issue, and open-ended response questions. The mixture of question types will help us use various types of data analysis to assess the responses we received. One of the major elements of the qualitative survey was incorporating privacy measures. We wanted to ensure data integrity and put measures in place so that the survey is password protected, only available through a specific link, and is only available to Black queer people. However, due to the incomplete data collection from the participating organizations, narrowing down a list of Black queer employees from each agency was challenging. Although we provided all employees and board members with the survey link, we created a solution requiring participants to answer 2 questions. Take us to the next slide. To assess the survey, to access the survey. The first question is, do you identify as Black? And the next is, do you identify as a member of the LGBTQ+ community? Hannah, if you take us to the next slide. Respondents had to answer yes to both questions to move forward with the survey. The method was imperfect, as non-Black queer people could still access the survey, but we saw this as the simplest way to provide a gatekeeping measure to narrow respondents to people who identify as Black and queer. And again, the participating organizations administered the survey to all of their board members and employees themselves through language that we provided them. And then those employees and board members who answered the first question, yes, I'm Black, yes, I'm queer, then gained access to the survey. Let's talk about the advisory council. Lighthouse Foundation adopted the methodology of community-led participatory action research, which prioritizes community feedback. In the second phase of the BQEI, Lighthouse Foundation convened a 10-member advisory council comprised of majority Black queer leaders in activism, anti-racism, social justice, public health, public policy, and Black queer representatives of each of the 5 cohort organizations. We included an employee or board member from each of the surveyed organizations because who better to craft this survey to glean dialogue. The Advisory Council met twice for 90 minutes each to create the qualitative board survey and qualitative employee survey used to gather data on the experiences of Black queer employees and board members. During these meetings, council members were shown drafts of each survey and provided feedback. After the surveys were co-created and approved by the Advisory Council, representatives from Northwestern's Evaluation, Data Integration, and Technical Assistance, or EDIT program, reviewed the surveys to ensure the clarity of the questions and alignment with appropriate research methods. Let's talk about survey administration, the interviews. In late summer 2021, Lighthouse Foundation contacted Black queer employees and board members who had expressed interest in the surveys that they would like to be interviewed. In September 2021, the BQEI analyst and me, our coordinator, conducted 6 interviews, 2 with Black queer board members and 4 with Black queer employees. Let's talk about the Black Queer Equity Task Force and the listening sessions. In September 2021, we began phase 3, the launch of the Black Queer Equity Task Force, to continue to have this work guided by key stakeholders required in community-led participatory action research. The task force included leaders in philanthropy, Black equity, social justice, and social services. They were presented with survey results and major themes resulting from the 6 interviews with Black queer board members and employees. They also reviewed information from the surveys that were completed. The task force met 5 times for 2 hours each. During these meetings, task force members were shown findings from the surveys and major themes of the interviews. The task force then reviewed each theme and created emerging equity indicators based on their collective community expertise. Lighthouse Foundation also held listening sessions with Black queer employees, Black queer board members, the CEOs of the 4 participating organizations, and executive directors from Black queer-led and serving nonprofit organizations, like the Chicago Black Gay Men's Caucus, and like Task Force Prevention and Community Services. In each of these listening sessions, participants weighed in on the emergent findings. Lighthouse Foundation brought this feedback back to the task force to inform our cultivation of the preliminary indicators. The task force took the survey and interview findings, their preliminary indicators, and the feedback on the preliminary indicators from the listening sessions and distilled them into the 5 emerging indicators of racial equity that we will review today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jamie. As a reminder, if you have any questions or comments about what's been shared so far, you're always welcome to submit those directly to Jamie Frazier in the chat. Now, the next person that we're going to hear from is Angela Barnes, who is a member of that BQEI Advisory Council that Jamie just discussed. Angela is also board chair at Center on Halsted. Angela is going to speak to us now about the process of participating in the Advisory Council. Thanks for joining us, Angela. Please go ahead.
Sure. Thank you so much. Good evening to everyone. And I apologize for the suboptimal environment. I'm sort of taking this from my car. I want to just really share with everyone that this process has been amazing. Being part of the advisory committee allowed really, I think, for for some of our voices to be heard, those of us who are members of these organizations. I found that, everything wasn't all planned out, right? And just asking us for comment on this or whatever. It really was an opportunity to kind of listen to what our experiences are in these different organizations, sitting on the board or being in leadership positions. And that information fed into really creating, right, this whole sort of index. And I think that the reason why I felt initially that it was important to participate is because we often hear of solutions to the problems that queer Black people experience in nonprofit organizations or in sitting on the board, but we don't hear a lot about solutions that are actually actionable and outcomes that can be measured. And so I really salute I'm so proud, right, of Lighthouse Foundation for really spearheading this, putting this forward, bringing us together as a community so that we can actually push forward really making us a part of the voice in this community that advocates for change. That's really, I don't know. I was asked to kind of talk about what my experience was, and honestly, I was just really honored to be asked to be a part of this, and quite frankly, absolutely honored to sit on an advisory council with such amazing people who are just really doing the work in our community to advance our message and our cause. So thank you.
Thank you, Angela. We appreciate your time, your remarks, and your voice on the council. The next people we're going to spotlight are two folks who participated in the listening sessions. We're going to start first with Louis Spraggins, who was a Black queer employee. And then after that, we're going to move to AIDS Foundation Chicago CEO John Peller. Louis, thank you for participating and also for being open to speaking with us today.
Awesome. Thank you, Carolyn. I actually want to start by saying thank you to you and thank you to the Lighthouse Foundation for pulling all this together. I'm really grateful to the 5 organizations that have decided to be a part of this first cohort. Because we can't move forward without working together. Things can't happen if we don't have everyone participating in the efforts to move forward and make things better. I think that the Black Queer Equity Index is beyond important, and that is why I decided to participate in the survey. I jumped at the opportunity to. This particular time that we're living in right now, it's a special time. There's a lot of things that are happening. There are a lot of things that are being brought to light, a lot of hard truths for America in general that are being brought to light. And it was without facing these hard truths and then working together to build new roads forward, there's no way things can get better. And I think that the Black Queer Equity Index is one of those steps forward and one of those tools that we're definitely going to need. So why did I participate? I participated because what y'all are doing is seriously important for all of us to move forward and for things to get better for people like me and other folks who are part of my community. My experience in participating in the listening sessions was, I have to echo Angela and say it was definitely a wonderful experience. It was, for me, in a lot of ways, it felt healing in some ways. It allowed me to share some of the experiences that I had been gone through in my life. I guess I could have started off by saying a bit more about who I am. Like she said, Louis Spraggins, Black queer employee. I've been working in the field of HIV and public health and prevention since about 1995. So I've actually had a lot of experience at different organizations, South Side, North Side, West Side, and working with specifically reaching out to different populations, but most of the populations I worked with were queer populations. And so I've had the opportunity to work with a number of the organizations that are part of this cohort. I've had the opportunity to work over the years with a number of other Black queer employees of these organizations. And I've seen and experienced myself both the highs and the lows of working in this field. Some of the very things that the Black Queer Equity Index is looking to bring to light so that we can make better are some of the experiences that I've had and that colleagues that I've worked with and shared food and broken bread with have experienced as well. So I think that basically, as I went through the sessions, I found it to be in some ways enlightening because I got to share some of my experience, but I also got to hear more experiences of other Black queer employees. I found it healing for me as well, because just letting some of that out and being able to share it with folks who had been through similar experiences was healing for me. And I think that will extend to the community if we're able to make good use of the data that we get from the Black Queer Equity Index. It also helped to increase a feeling of community for me at a time when feelings of community were low for me as personally. And it was also an opportunity to discuss details, to talk about things and add our experiences and other questions that we thought should be added to the surveys for the Black Queer Equity Index. So I'm hoping that my participation and the participation of all the others who were in on those listening sessions is going to help deepen the data that we get as the Black Queer Equity Index moves forward. So, I mean, I guess I'm probably running over time. They told me 5 minutes. I thought I was going to be real quick like that, but you know, I talk. Essentially, the reason why I think it's important again is because it's time for us to face hard truths, and we can't face these hard truths if they're not brought to light. And the Black Queer Equity Index can help with that. I think that me being honest and other folks who have participated being honest will help us to meet the goals that we want to meet, which is for us to make things better for all of these Black queer folks who are working hard for the health of themselves and the health of their communities, and indeed for the health of all the other folks who are not even Black or queer in this country. Because of everything that's going on, because of not just COVID, but because of things like intersectionality now becoming a more common word and a common understood concept. And people are now coming to the point where they understand a trauma and deep effects of trauma, both for the individual and intergenerationally. And we're also at a point where people actually are willing to listen to things about critical race theory and things of that nature. So we're at a critical time where people are willing to listen more than they have been in the past. And I think it would be a foolish thing to miss out on the opportunity to bring things to light and work on them in a positive way, in a way that is intentional, in a way that brings positivity for the rest of us. So I am once again grateful that the Lighthouse Foundation and all of the folks who are part of the first cohort are participating, because it is this work that is going to help us all to get better. And also because generally I have hope. And I guess I'll end with paraphrasing or poorly paraphrasing one of my favorites, or a few of my favorites. The moral arc of the universe, I don't believe it bends towards justice. I don't believe the moral arc of the universe bends towards injustice. I think it bends where we will it to bend. And so when we work together, like we're doing now, pulling the data together, bringing things to light, I think that the Black Queer Equity Index is going to help us to move forward. It's up to us to bend that arc towards justice, towards love, and towards equitable distribution of resources, of power, of all the things that we need to live and to be who we are as Black queer individuals and as just general human beings. And there, I ran over way too much. I'll stop there. Thank you. Awesome.
Thank you, Louis. We really appreciate that and that honesty. Really, thank you so much for sharing that and for being with us today. The next person that we're going to hear from is the CEO of AIDS Foundation Chicago, John Peller, who also participated in the session. So John, please go ahead.
Hi, good evening, everyone. And thank you so much to Pastor Jamie, the team at Lighthouse, and all of the community members like Angela, who have contributed by volunteering your time and expertise to this project. And of course, I want to say hello to our board chair, Craig Johnson, who has joined tonight, and all of the AFC staff and friends who are listening in. So AFC has two purposes as an organization. The first is to end the HIV epidemic, and the second is to end homelessness. And what unites these two issues, or really what drives both of them, is systemic racism. And what we're doing every day at AFC is treating the symptoms of this systemic racism by helping people who are newly diagnosed with HIV or struggling with their HIV diagnosis to find stability, or house someone who's maybe been, living on the streets for a decade. And so in order to address these issues, we've got to end systemic racism in our community in Chicago. And we've got to take that on as a priority issue, which we're doing. But we've also got to address systemic racism in our organization. And when Jamie reached out about this project, I was so excited because what's so unique about it is the opportunity to sit around a table with our peer organizations and talk together and problem solve about the challenges that we're facing around racial equity. And probably the only person in the city who can get the 4 CEOs on a Zoom call on some random evening is Jamie Fraser, who did it, and it was a phenomenal conversation. So Jamie, thank you for bringing us together. And Jamie has really phenomenal ideas that he shared about how we can all walk together to collectively build racial equity within our organizations. And wouldn't it be amazing if our 4 organizations were working together on something like a leadership academy for Black queer employees? And that might be something that AFC, even with 130 employees, might struggle to pull off on our own because we're just like every organization running as fast as we can to keep up with some of the day-to-day work. But together, working collectively, that's a project that we might be able to do and have a tremendous impact. So I'm really excited about the possibilities of how we can leverage our community's expertise and each other's expertise to help our Black queer employees and community members and board members and clients to grow and how we can help our organizations to improve racial equity. So Jamie, thank you, and thank you to your team for all the terrific work.
Thank you, John. We really appreciate your participation and perspective, and for just speaking about the possibilities that we have now as we collaborate. Absolutely. The next person we're going to hear from is Dr. Alan Womble, who is Lighthouse Foundation's Manager of Strategy. And then after that, we're going to have a word from Adrian Ermer, who's on the BQEI task force. So Dr. Womble is now going to speak with us about our research findings. Alan, please go ahead.
Thank you, Carlin. And it's great to be here with everyone as we begin to move into the next phase of what has been a very fun, but also a lot of work in this process. Jamie detailed well the various forms of data that we collected. And through that analysis of the data, arose 5 major themes, which we were able to further distill into 3 main elements of a progression from marginalization to equity that Black queer board members and Black queer employees dreamed of in these organizations. The 3 main pillars of this progression are marginalization, optical diversity, and real work. And so very briefly, I'll speak about each of these themes. As we move in between the themes, you'll see quotes. I won't read the quotes because they're there for you to read, but I will read more of a definition of each theme. So starting with marginalization, we use marginalization here as a state of being and also as actions such as microaggressions that Black queer employees and board members experience in their times in workplaces. Everyone who completed the study or surveys reported either experiencing marginalizing acts, or feeling marginalized at some point in their work lives. Marginalization can appear in a few different ways and did appear in these ways in our research. First, it's physical. Both as a result of working during the pandemic where all of us were, or many of us were moved into our homes, but also as a result of working in an office or in a building that wasn't a part of the central office space of the organization, employees felt and experienced that physical marginalization of not being in the central core of the organization. Marginalization also appeared in a social way. They weren't able to see other people that looked like them and certainly not work with other people that looked like them. Some survey respondents and interviewees shared that even some of the social content or professional development content that they experienced was much more targeted and focused on operational pieces that didn't matter to them. And so they felt some sense of social marginalization and isolation in the organization. And then there was political marginalization. Black queer employees often felt isolated and unheard by leadership. Oftentimes they serve on the front lines of the organizations and thus weren't often in rooms and spaces where they could communicate their ideas to the upper leadership of the organizations. And thus they felt like there was a lack of support given to them and their wishes. And sometimes they saw barriers between actually auditioning their ideas for folks in the C-suites. Other sources of marginalization included navigating white spaces and the politics of whiteness that comes as a result of that. This theme led to many of the microaggressions Black queer employees reported feeling and board members reported feeling. And oftentimes it wasn't just microaggressions. Board members and Black queer employees experienced overt aggressive behaviors that sometimes were used to silence them or prevent them from making or enacting change in their organizations. The next phase in this continuum or progression is optical diversity. Optical diversity refers to the visible presence of Black queer bodies in the organization. In the data, it shows up in two ways. On one hand, it represents the belief that Black queer employees and board members have that these organizations sometimes trot out Black and brown queer bodies for advertising and for grant applications without truly investing in equity and thriving both in employees and clients who are marginalized or have marginalized identities. But on the other hand, the theme of optical diversity represents this need for Black queer employees and board members to see those in the organization in the C-suite and on the board that have identities that they also have. So seeing more Black queer people in leadership, and especially Black and trans people were lifted up in the survey results as well. Though it's easy to fall into the trap of labeling optical diversity that leads to greater representation of Black queer people as positive, and optical diversity that leads to organizations trotting out Black queer bodies for publicity and grant purposes to draw in additional funders, that's a fallacy. What we found in the data, and it was very clear, is that optical diversity is important because it does show a representation of Black queer bodies in a space, but also it is not the endpoint and it can't be the endpoint. If we're truly going to experience equity of Black queer employees and Black queer equity in general in society, we have to move from optical diversity to the next phase in the progression, which is real work. Real work is this theme Black queer employees and board members continue to argue for. And it's really the action that backs up some of the virtue signaling found in optical diversity. And it backs up that virtue signaling with real efforts that meaningfully invest in and give real voice and power to the Black queer employees, Black queer board members, as well as the Black queer clients in the organizations. Real work breaks down into 5 sub-themes. Those sub-themes provided the foundation for our emerging equity indicators. And those sub-themes are resource allocation, giving voice and power to the most marginalized in organizations, professional development that equips marginalized or folks with marginalized identities with the resources and the tools to be successful both in those organizations and beyond, systemic action instead of individual action, which can transform the Black queer experience in our organizations from being resulting upon individual actions by individual supervisors to something that is systemic and systemic policies that support Black queer thriving and flourishing. And then finally, data collection. Next, a member of our equity task force will detail these emerging indicator categories as well as the indicators associated with them. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Womble. And yes, please, Adrienne Irmer, our BQEI task force member, is now going to share our emerging racial equity indicators. Adrienne, thank you for joining us today.
Sure, thanks. for having me and the invitation to join the incredible task force with all of the amazing humans who comprise it. We had very enjoyable Thursday evenings together, fueled with Uber Eats and great ideas. And it was a pleasure to work with everyone. I, in my day job, serve as the AVP for External Affairs at Illinois Tech, but in my passion work, one of my projects is co-organizing Pride Southside with my cousin Jared. So some faces I think I saw came through this year. We are going to be scheduled for June of 2022 when Pride Month is actually supposed to take place, hoping, you know, Omicron or Omega variant don't rain on that parade, but I hope to continue to see and work with all of you on that. I come to this work because I have a lot of family, both born and chosen, who identify as Black and queer. And my identity as a Black woman is very invested in seeing all facets of DEI explored in robust ways. So that is what motivated me to say yes when asked to put this on my plate as a project. So without further ado, you've heard a lot about the why. You've heard a lot about the how. And I'm going to give you some details about the what that came out of those very awesome Thursday evening meetings. These indicators were created to reflect Black queer employees and board members' desire to see real action. That is, organizations implementing anti-racist policies and practices. The items are areas where Black queer employees and board members called for real action, and indicators of that real action follow. In other words, what real action looks like in each of these areas. So these indicators were derived from an analysis of the survey and interview data, the expertise of the Black Queer Equity Task Force, and the feedback from Black queer employees, board members, CEOs from participating queer serving nonprofits, and CEOs for Black queer-led nonprofits in the Chicagoland area. These categories of indicators are as follows: resource allocation, giving voice and power, professional development, moving from individual to systemic, and data collection. But now I got to pull up my script because the screen share just took that down. One sec. Oh, there we go. Perfect. So the resource allocation category is meant to provide an adequate funding to programs for Black and brown, queer, and trans people, for employees and clients. So the index that floated to the top of these discussions was, can your organization present an analysis of programming in a cost per participant manner across organization programming that disaggregates cost per participant across racial, gender, sexuality groups, and zip codes, and assess the reasons for difference of cost per person, especially if the programs are similar. The second one, or category, giving voice and power. These were the ideas that floated to the top as key indicators. The giving voice and power is a means to create mechanisms in the organization that gives voice and power to those in the organization who are most marginalized and who hold the most marginalized identities and whose experiences match those of the clients. So 2 indicators came up for this. One being, does your organization have an opportunity or medium where Black queer employees can speak directly to those with positional authority, including the CEO? The second one, does your organization have affinity spaces or groups where Black queer employees can connect with each other to build community and create workplace solutions? The third category of professional development is meant to establish ways for Black queer employees and board members who are called for trainings and professional development opportunities that offset the marginality they have experienced. So both groups want these opportunities for growth and advancement to be sensitive to their lived experiences of people with historically marginalized identities and how that marginality manifests itself in the workplace. So the key indicators that floated to the top here are, does your organization offer professional development opportunities to employees? Does your organization provide professional development opportunities to board members in separate spaces? And then there are some sub points on this one. Are these training and professional development opportunities led by folks who hold the identities that they are training? Or are they run by organizations with rigorous analytical preparation, meaningful life experiences, and deep connections to the community? The other sub point here is, does your organization recognize professional development for employees as a 70-20-10 model? So 70 being on the job training, 20% being coaching and mentorship, and 10% being actual, in-class sort of training, conventionally speaking. So the 70-20-10 model is customarily used to describe the optimal sources of learning needed for professional development. It holds that employees obtain 70% of their skills on the job, 20% interactions with others, and 10% from the formal space. The second indicator that floated up here is centers around if professional development is part of your employee performance review process. Does your employee performance review process include any individualized employee development plan? The third indicator, how does the per person comparison of leadership development costs break down over race, gender, identity, and sexuality? In as much as, how are your resources and budget for professional development being spent? Who is it being spent on, and is that equitable? Does your organization have coaching programs for Black queer employees? Does your organization have mentorship programs for Black queer employees? The next category of individual action to systemic action, Black queer board members and employees highlighted the tendency for organizations to rely on individual action to provide healthy workspaces for Black queer employees and board members, as well as to contend with racism, acts of marginalization, and downright bad behavior. Through their experiences, Black queer employees and board members called for more systemic fixes to address these issues. The first indicator here asks, does your organization have a process for your board of directors to address other board members' behavior which is not aligned with the organization's values? The second indicator asks, does your organization have a designated representative to whom people can go with issues of racism and equality and inequity? Subpoint A on this, the DEI lead for organizations must have specific anti-racism DEI training that qualifies them for the work. Subpoint 2, are organizations documenting grievances, terminations, discipline, along with the intersecting identities of the employees? Key indicator 3 here asks, what does your organization do to meet the needs of Black LGBTQ+ employees in a culturally competent way? How equitable are your organization's policies? For the final category of data collection, community-led participatory action research encourages researchers to reflect on the research process throughout the various stages of data collection and data analysis. BQEI researchers discovered the difficulty of ascertaining demographic data about employees and board members through such reflections. Organizations did not collect this information, and if they had some demographic data, it often didn't reflect the intersections of marginalized identities. Lighthouse Foundation created an independent tool for the BQEI to collect this data from employees and board members to best support Black queer and employees and board members with historically marginalized identities it is imperative to know what identities are held and cross-sections of identities exist in order to make those comparisons. So given that methodology, we still had an indicator float to the surface for this category. And that question and that indicator asks, does your organization track intersecting demographic data of employees, either individually or using an outsourced tool, understanding that employee self-identification does present limitations in data collection? And then subpoint here asks, what percentage of your Black queer employees are hourly, salaried, or contracted? So this represents in totality the what out of these meetings, understanding that it is iterative, and we are going to continue to build on this. And we look forward to hearing any questions or feedback.
Thank you, Adrienne. We appreciate you joining us on the task force, but also speaking with us this evening. It's really great to hear the results of those meetings and also just about your experience on the task force itself. What we're going to do next is talk about what comes next. Throughout this project, we've been excited to work with Northwestern's EDIT program. Again, that's the Evaluation, Data Integration, and Technical Assistance Program. They've assisted us with analyzing and interpreting our data. So I now want to introduce Eric Glenn, who's the project manager for the EDIT team. He's going to talk about why he wanted to help with this project and how his team will collaborate next year. Eric, thanks for speaking with us today.
Hi, and thank you for having. So like you said, I am the project manager at the EDIT team at Northwestern. We're a research, evaluation, and technical assistance unit at Northwestern. Our focus is really on supporting and supplementing the capacity of local agencies, particularly as they are conducting work and providing services for marginalized communities. I think for our team, our focus really is on LGBT populations and BIPOC populations. And over the last couple of years, we've really focused on expanding our offering through a variety of methods, but I think for us, the strongest one really is on direct partnership. And so one of the projects that we've been able to work on is with Lighthouse Foundation around the Black Queer Equity Index. My team, a small cohort of ours, have joined Jamie and his in making sure that there is some, I think the best way to say it maybe is we're able to add our technical expertise to the content expertise of the Lighthouse Foundation's team to try and produce something that is, I think, reflective of what a lot of us know is going on in our communities, and especially when it comes to professional settings and the impact that those have on our broader lives, that there are opportunities that we can pursue if we have data that can back up the stories that we know. And so that's really the opportunity that we're looking forward to. It's really exciting. I think Jamie has talked about ideas like these for a long time. I know that your team over there too has been talking about these ideas for a long time, and we're always looking for opportunities to add what we have. In terms of where it goes from here, the team has collected a lot of data, a lot of qualitative data, and with some opportunities to follow up with some interviewees to go even further. I think we're talking about having an analysis and maybe series of analyses that last for the next few years just on the data that's already been collected. In terms of turning these into actionable recommendations, it also looks like there will be waves of recommendations that come out, not just from the task forces, but also from the data that's been collected so far. We're talking about in the years to come to have further iterations of the index that are impacted by what we learn right now. So I think maybe one of the last things that I want to mention is what an inspiration this can be to other jurisdictions who are looking to do similar work. So part of what we're interested in doing as an evaluation team is talking about not only the product of the work, but also how the work came to be. I think some like process evaluation is what we're talking about. But there is an opportunity to tell the story about how BQEI came to collect this much data and be on the doorstep of getting recommendations out the door. That I think a lot of cities that we can think of that have strong, vibrant, or maybe strong, vibrant in the process, Black queer communities can utilize something like this.
Thank you, Eric. That is really exciting. Your expertise has been invaluable, and we really appreciate your work and collaboration on this project. And up next will be our Executive Director, Jamie Frazier, who's going to share the next steps that Lighthouse Foundation will take to advance the BQEI. Jamie, please take it away.
So here's what comes next. Next year, we will continue refining the Black Queer Equity Indicators list in collaboration with Northwestern's EDIT program and a multi-pronged steering committee, which will include separate feedback circles for Black queer employees, Black queer board members, CEOs, and external expert community members. In 2022, we will invite other organizations to join the second cohort of the BQEI project. And in 2023, we will evaluate both cohorts on the equity indicators. In subsequent years, or phase 4, we will continue to survey these organizations annually, along with an additional cohort of new organizations. Once organizations agree, we will begin to collect data on each organization through our updated mixed methods survey and new methods and opportunities for community input. Each new organization will have a year to implement the racial equity indicators and will receive a letter grade in the second year of their BQEI participation that reflects their continued effort to improve Black queer equity in their organization. While we have launched this project locally, we aim to expand the BQEI to assess organizations across Chicagoland, Illinois, and the nation, including the Trevor Project, Human Rights Campaign, and GLAAD. We would like to take a pause for the cause to acknowledge the following funders that have helped make the BQEI possible: the African American Legacy Fund and Initiative of the Chicago Community Trust, the Alliance for Research in Chicagoland Communities, or ARC, of Northwestern University, Amazon, Amped Nonprofit Consulting, the Center for Health Equity Research Chicago, SHARE, of the University of Illinois, Chicago, the Chicago Racial Justice Pool Fund, Conant Family Foundation, Crossroads Fund, Emergent Fund, Getting to Zero Illinois, an initiative led by AIDS Foundation Chicago, Grand Victoria Foundation, Holy Trinity Lutheran Church Endowment Fund, the Chicago Temple Fund, and the Field Foundation of Illinois. Your generosity has helped power this project and make it a success. And I want you to know that I'm very grateful to our funders. So we will now address any questions that folks have submitted to me in the comments box or in the chat box. Don't be a stranger. I know that we have offered quite a lot of information. So a few things that I want to share. Next Thursday, December the 16th, everyone who has registered for this Zoom is going to receive a recording of this update and a paginated, I think it's 25 pages now, a 25-page report that details all of the information that you have heard today. So you'll get to read more about the advisory council, more about the BQEI task force, more about our survey process, and also more about the emerging racial equity indicators. I know, like me, as Adrienne was rolling through those lists, you may have been like, oh, this is a lot of information. How do I write it all down? You don't have to write it all down, because next Thursday, you're going to get a fancy report that Hannah, our communications coordinator, is putting together that details all of this information very brilliantly. All right, so let me take some of the questions that folks have submitted and answer, depending on what the questions are, Dr. Womble, I may pivot to you to ask for your expertise. So the first question that was asked is, were there any attempts to reach out to other Black and queer-led and serving organizations? Absolutely. You know, this is why it was key on the task force that we have folks like Adrian from Pride Southside, while we had folks like Jerome, who is the executive director of Project Vita. It's why we had Zahara, who is the executive director of Life is Work. It's why we had on the task force Keith Green, who's the vice chair of the Chicago Black Gay Men's Caucus. Also, if you look at our listening sessions, we had representatives from Task Force Prevention and Community Services participate, as well as representatives from the Chicago Black Gay Men's Caucus participate in the listening session. So one of the things that Lighthouse Foundation is in profound recognition of is that we are not the only Black, queer-led and serving organization in Chicago. One of the beautiful things about Chicago is that there are so many other organizations that are a part of the constellation of Black queer equity in this city. And so we are very grateful to them for their expertise, for their deep and meaningful collaboration, and for their helping to co-create this process that has been quite simply beautiful. Want to answer some other questions. Who is Lighthouse accountable to in this process? Our Black queer communities or the non-Black led organizations that have partnered with Lighthouse on the index? And how will we know if questions have been answered or not if there is no transparency in the conversation? I think ultimately, and I say this often when I talk about who I am and what Lighthouse Foundation is, I am a community organizer, and Lighthouse Foundation is a community organizing organization. Our accountability is chiefly to the Black queer communities that we serve. This then is why we have had such deep collaboration and co-creation at every step of the process, in the advisory council, in the task force, in listening sessions, because we need the full witness of our community, and we need the distinctive competency of each element of our community. I think we're ultimately accountable to Black queer people. If we want to be more specific, I think we're ultimately accountable to the Black queer people who work at nonprofit organizations for which this project has been purposed. And that's why it was so important that Black queer employees and board members be on the advisory council, be in the listening sessions. Of course, they couldn't be on the task force because you can't very well create the rubric by which your organization will be judged, but at every step, Black queer board members and employees have had a say, and a powerful say. Because who is Lighthouse Foundation to say Black queer employees and board members at nonprofit organizations need X? It would be presumptuous. It's not our place. This is why we instead chose to engage in a research project, so that through listening sessions, through surveys, we were able to gather the experiences and insight of Black queer folk. So every step of this journey, we are accountable to Black queer employees, board members, and Black queer-led and serving organizations. Want to address some other questions that people are giving. Is there any reason to believe these indicators are different in Chicago versus other metro areas? Or do you expect that these indicators are the same across the United States? I suspect that the challenges that we are talking about are common. You know, one of the things that we have been very careful to do in the construction of this index is we want to ensure that it is scalable, and we want to ensure that the solutions we co-create will work not just for the organizations that have been surveyed, but for the many, many additional nonprofit organizations that will be onboarded to the index in future years. So the things that we're talking about, professional development, career, mentorship, coaching, creating opportunities for Black queer board members and employees to build relationships that are distinct, but also that are collaborative, I think are powerful. And one of the other things that I want to uplift is the ways in which Black queer board members and employees have stepped forward to join this process. And I also want to celebrate Michael, David, Tico, and John, the CEOs of the organizations that have participated in this project. It took some trust. They were kind of walking through the tunnel with us, and there were no lights on, and they were kind of praying that the light coming towards them wasn't a train, but it was the light of day. So, we've been walking through this tunnel together. And at the beginning, when we started this project in January, we couldn't really define the BQEI because we didn't know what it was. We had to wait until we were able to do the interviews, the listening sessions, the surveys, so that we could ascertain what is needed in these organizations from our Black queer kin to advance these organizations so that they can in turn advance their capacity to serve Black queer clients and patients. Okay, more questions. And I think this is just a comment. I have to take off, but I'm so grateful for all of this hard work that you all are doing. It's necessary, and I'm thrilled to support it in any way that I can. Another question, a comment. Thank you for having me be a part of this amazing journey with you all. I have to jump onto another meeting. Thank you, and I will chat with you soon. That's all the time that we have for questions today. I want to thank the edit team. I want to thank our funders. I want to thank the CEOs. I want to thank the task force, the advisory council. I want to thank the staff of Lighthouse Foundation. I want to thank our care member organizations who have shown up mightily in this space tonight, who have had their eyes on this process throughout. And I really want to thank my kin. I want to thank Black queer employees and board members that have come to be a part of this deeply collaborative process. And I want to thank Howard Brown Health and AFC and Center on Halsted and Chicago House for saying yes to Black queer equity, for saying yes to this project, and for saying yes to advancing the plight of their employees and board members. So I'm very grateful for the beautiful moment that we have had tonight. And I am now going to pass it back to Carlin.
Thanks, Jamie. And thank you everyone for coming tonight, for your kind attention and for your support of the project, as well as your support of us as an organization. As Jamie said, we're going to be sending out the full BQEI report to all the email addresses that are registered on this Zoom. That's going to go out next week on December 16th. And it's a massive, beautiful document that we were really excited for you to be able to pore over, put a lot of work into it. It's going to be beautiful. To all of our care members, we're going to see you on Saturday for our monthly meeting. We're excited for that. Thank you for joining us. And if anyone has any more questions about how to support the work of Lighthouse Foundation or participate in our events or otherwise get involved in and work with us, you can reach out to us through the contact information. Typically, we are at LightFoundChai on all social media. We're also lightfoundchai.org on the internet. That's our website. And we're just so happy to be in community with you. And we appreciate you spending your evening with us. So please stay in touch and take care. Thanks, everyone.